Greetings and welcome to OP Tuesdays. If you love our programs, then you want to listen to this short announcement before the lecture. As you know, I organize and host the live streams personally. Since I need to take 2 months of medical leave, don't worry, it's fine. We have put the live streams on a temporary break. But don't worry, we have you covered with fantastic pre recorded lectures that we are excited to share with you. These videos will be premiered at our usual time, and you can watch them together so that you can discuss them in the chat or you can watch them anytime later. We have also stopped the weekly newsletter and the weekly word puzzles, both of which will start again in June. Here's the overview of our calendar for the next 2 months. OP Tuesdays will continue with pre recorded lectures till the second half of May, when we have our summer vacations. Then information regarding the upcoming lectures will be shared midweek and on Mondays. To get all the details, stay connected and updated by following our social media pages using our handle at Oral Pathology 360 or visit our website at oralpathology360.com and follow the events calendar. Or then, if you haven't already done so, hit the subscribe and the bell buttons right here to receive all the notifications. Now, it is sad not to meet every week, but we shall return soon. Meanwhile, the scheduled lectures are great and I'm sure you will find them valuable. If you want to help at this time, we would appreciate it very much if you interacted with the content, commented, and shared the videos while our own sharing activities are mostly paused. And we thank you for your understanding and support always. Enjoy your lecture and we'll see you in some time.
Now, so we're going to do a little bit of derm pathology. Again, I'm trying to go into some areas that I usually go, wait a minute, the hand, there's a reason I'm going to show you these lesions, right? Actually, so something interesting. So I'm going to tell you, I'll tell you the story after I show you this. This is not the one I thought of. Never mind. So the first thing is you can see I've got epithelium here and I've got ink, and I can see it looks like they're almost around it. So the first thing is when you get low power views, and I learned this from the dermatopathologist, is what you're looking for is is it symmetrical and round. So with like nevi, that's your clue that it's probably benign. So the next thing I need to do is I need to see, okay, what is this doing with the interface? So there is a delineation between the lesion and the epithelium. It's keratinized, which I would expect, right? Your palms and your soles have a thick keratin layer. So everything there seems to be normal. But I've got this lesion that's not well encapsulated, but still somewhat well defined. But it does seem to be working its way down through the eccrine glands and into the subdermis, subcutis. And it does seem to be almost at, if not at, the inked margin. So that's going to matter whether it's a benign or malignant tumor. We'll start to get a sense that there's some pattern here. So I know I've got a spindle type lesion. So I'm going to have a soft tissue lesion of the hand. It seems to distill itself out, so that's good. I've got a little hair bulb here. I've got some eccrine glands here. And the first thing we'll notice is there are two things that note here. There are spindled cells, and there are almost Teuton type multinucleated giant cells with some sort of hemosideroid type pigment. So we'll have to start thinking about spindle lesions that have giant cells. So we're going to start talking about dermatofibromas. We're going to talk about some of those type lesions. And what we're going to be probably worrying about, as I do in all cases, am I going to be looking at a sarcoma? That's the most important thing to rule out. So in many areas, you're going to see these multinucleated giant cells in multiple spots with this background of spindle cells that do have some pleomorphism, but I don't see a lot of mitoses or any. There is a background kind of collagen a little bit, swirling, whirling, patternless. So I'm automatically thinking of a delineation between a dermatofibroma and a dermatofibrosarcoma protuberans. That's the first thing I'm thinking about. And we're going to figure out how we can tease that out. So I can see some alterations in pattern. But when I look at the cells themselves, they're actually not cytologically that atypical for spindle cells. In fact, what they remind me of are either fibroblasts or myofibroblasts that have been tuned up, right? They kind of have this almost cigar shape, but then they peter out to like a sharp point at one end. And I get a few more of these somewhat wannabe giant cells, a little bit of light collagen in the background. Then you have all this entrapped collagen. Okay, now I'm really starting to think, am I in the dermatofibroma, dermatofibrosarcoma protuberans area? Because that's the first thing. And then I'll start thinking about what are my immunohistochemical patterns. And I can tell you, if I saw this case on a person's face, I'm not going to sign it out without a skin pathologist looking at it. That's the smart thing to do for these cases. So it turned out it was a dermatofibroma. And we're going to talk about how you can actually discern that from a DFSP. Because I can tell you, I've signed out one case in the past on a small biopsy as a neurofibroma. And the skin pathologist looked at it with me and said it's a neurofibroma. When we got the resection, it was pervading through fat, and it ended up being a DFSP. So even we make errors based on small biopsies. And then the patient wound up getting a Mohs procedure. He had a chest x-ray. Everything was fine. He has a scar on his face now. So I'm going to show you something in our zone. And in fact, I'm going to show you my oops case because I think it's worth it for the learning. So I'm going to show you this thing had been here for 8 years. So the first thing is you look low power, I was like, I don't even see anything, right? So this is actually the resection case. The small biopsy I had was kind of like just this, and it looked like a neurofibroma. But I'm going to show you that there's this sort of very indistinct lesion, right? So how do I tell the difference, right? So there's normal collagen. This is all lesion. So this was actually the first resection. So you'll see hair follicles. You'll see some sebaceous glands. This is all tumor. And then you can see, so I can ask my learners, right? There's always a little bit of things to be learning here. Can my learners identify sebaceous glands? Can they identify the isthmus? Can they identify the hair follicle? Can they identify the erector pili muscles? Can they identify all these structures? Nice erector pili muscle. You get goosebumps, you'll know what that muscle's all about. So getting some normal anatomy is really nice. So you have it all here. Sebaceous glands. So, and maybe some eccrine glands. This is all the tumor. Now it's pretty bland looking. So remember, on a biopsy, I didn't have all this pervasion through the fat and this pervasion through the follicles and the pervasion through the sebaceous glands. This is all tumor. And it's somewhat cellular. So we're going to have to look at this a little higher power. So again, just some beautiful hair follicle type stuff. One location I actually would get alopecia cases, and I'm like, "Ooh, I'm outside my zone here." So most of the time it's androgenetic alopecia. I saw one case of sarcoidosis. So what I want to get is I want to get into these cells here. So the first thought, this is what the tissue looked like under small biopsy. These look like sort of nerve cells to me. What I made the mistake of not doing is I didn't do an S100 on these. And we didn't think we needed to do it. I or the dermatopathologist. So we said, okay, this looks like a neurofibroma. It's kind of cellular, but it's got the comma-shaped looks to it. But then other areas are more cellular. Especially this is the resection. Or supposedly resection. So it's much more cellular now. But it's not pleomorphic. There's not mitoses. Background's fairly bland. Some of the cells are more plump. If you look, some of them almost look like they have little pseudo-inclusions in them, right? This still looks like a nerve lesion to me. So I'm thinking about like neurotized nevus. I'm thinking about, neurofibromas. There's a little bit of entrapped collagen here. So, okay, this is a variation of dermatofibroma. I was not convinced. None of us were convinced that this was malignant at first. But now you have this thing pervading through fat. And so, unfortunately, this is what happened. The story goes like this, and everybody says this was a challenging case. So we sent this case to a soft tissue specialist who said, I'm not sure. Based on the CD34 positivity and the S100 negativity, the dermatopathologist that I originally saw the case with said, I think this is a DFSP. It made its way all the way to Mayo Clinic. That's how much they were deliberating this. The soft tissue specialist sent it to Mayo Clinic, and they finally did the genetics behind this. So the moral of the story here is, even DFSPs, we're not used to seeing them. I'm not used to seeing them this histologically bland. But as it turns out, if you open up the soft tissue tumor book, there's an example of a DFSP that looks just like this. So what's the lesson to be learned here? The lesson to be learned here is, if you have doubts, our algorithm for any soft tissue tumor, if we thought it was a neurofibroma, we started doing a CD34 and an S100 on all of the cases. And by that, this was the first and the last DFSP that we had that presented this way. So I don't think you have to do the molecular on these, but I think if you have a neurofibroma that's not staining for S100, I think you need to have this. The patient was doing well. My understanding is 5 years later, he was okay. They did a chest CT on him and everything. But again, it's disconcerting to sign out a case and change your diagnosis. And the patient was extremely understanding, goes, I can't believe the efforts you all went to make sure this was taken care of. And he went to a Mohs surgeon. And then he goes, I don't even care if I have a scar, because it was down near his chin. He goes, I'll tell everybody I got it in a fight, and, and the other guy looks worse. I mean, he was humorous about it. And I think he was doing fine. The other one I want to show is an upper lip nodule, because, the first thing that comes to mind is people have things on the lower lip. They're going to be mucoceles, and things in the upper lip are going to be gland tumors. To show you, this is not going to look like a salivary gland tumor. So the first thing is, it's somewhat nodular. It's fragmented, but it's somewhat nodular. So we're going to see there are a couple of nodular lesions that show up this way. The second thing is, I'm going to show you there's just some background sort of scar tissue. There's some nerve in the background, but now I'm going to show you the lesion. And the first thing I want to draw your attention to is the pattern. It has somewhat of a little bit more myxoid pattern, and it almost looks like it has little internal nodularities, right? It has this sort of mix between this fibrous and more optically clear areas. It's very well contained around the edges, right? Even with the septations, it's pretty well contained. So when I talk to a skin pathologist, he goes, when I see this is going to be benign. Said, I'm not worried about a malignancy here. So we're going to think about benign lesions that have a spindly appearance and an alternating fibrous and myxoid characteristic. So just different nodules, but all pretty well encapsulated. All pretty well encapsulated. All pretty well encapsulated. And the septations are part of the clue to the lesion. So I'm showing you all the way around both nodules to see it as very well. So now we're going to look at the cells. So what I have is, I have a spindle cell lesion that has some nesting. The background stroma is not very collagenous. It's a little bit more loose. It's a little bit more myxoid. The cells vary from plump spindly to actual spindly. There are some nerve-like pseudo-inclusions into this. The cells are not particularly wavy. They do have some pointy appearance, and they have some plump appearance. So my first thoughts is, this is going to be a nerve lesion, or I might consider some kind of myofibroblastic lesion. But then you have these sort of glomeruloid structures. Okay, so do I need to think about melanocytic lesions? Maybe I do. Maybe I do. But these don't have the nuclear features of melanomas, but there are some spitz nevi that can be melanoma-like. So, all right, so I've got nerve, I've got melanoma, even though melanoma is less likely based on the histologic features, and I've got some kind of fibroblastic lesion. But, melanomas are not well contained like this. So I'm going to run that down a little bit further. So again, the cellular features are pretty much, there's some enlargement of nuclei, but for the most part, this is fairly uniform across the board. So I'm going to tell you what the diagnosis was. So there's this whole debate between nerve sheath tumors, neurotheciomas. Is it academic? Is it real? It seems to be real. So I did some matching, right? This is why we have textbooks and pictures. I went to my soft tissue book and I'm like, okay, this is going to be in the nerve lesions or whatever. I looked at all the myofibroblastic lesions and said, this doesn't look like anything like that. Then I started looking, okay, I'm in the nerve sheath tumor family. So I started thinking, do I need to do some immunohistochemistry on this? I showed it to a skin pathologist. She goes, this is a neurothekioma. You don't need anything. So you can do S100. It's kind of iffy. There's a couple other stains that you can do. But I wanted you to see that benign nerve sheath tumors can make you wonder about things like melanomas. And they can also lead you to believe, am I looking at a nerve tumor or a DFSP? So what I did is I put all of these things together. I like to do this and lay them side by side. And if you notice, several of these lesions, at least two of the lesions, have factor 13A. That's one thing that's talked about in the literature a lot, but I don't think it's that helpful. Now, the good news is if you have a factor 13A lesion, guess what? At least you've ruled out the malignant one, right? So I'm either going to have a DF or a neurofibroma. The nice part about that is even if you're wrong, the outcome's going to be the same for the patient, right? Unless they have multiple neurofibromas, because then you may have a syndrome. So if I have a factor 13A positive soft tissue tumor of the skin, then I know it's probably benign. However, if it doesn't pick up the S100, but it does pick up the CD34, now I have to worry about the DFSP. So, in any of these cases now, if I see these cases, if I'm in any doubt, I'm probably doing S100 and CD34, and I might do 13A. The neurotheciomas, interestingly enough, don't pick up any of them. So that's kind of helpful. So if you have that kind of nodular lesion with those internal septations, it looks a little bit more myxoid. And as long as it's not strongly positive for the melanoma markers and the histiocytic markers, then I think you just call it neurothekioma. It becomes your, because it's almost like a nerve sheath tumor. So it's not really, it's almost like, almost fibroblastic. So I think this is what now, that case drove me to look at these four cases, these four lesions this way. Okay. So again, my job is, there's, if anybody's ever listened to the US News, we had a nice gentleman, his name was Colin Powell, right? He was our Secretary of State for a while. He says, great leaders are those who can actually simplify for you. So that's what I'm trying to do, is simplify for you and give you some, when you see the presentation, you can go back and look at this. Okay. And you can take some notes and know, okay, these are this, and you notice most of these, I've sort of, I went through this period where I did immunohistochemical things and everything. And now I've trimmed it back to, I'll start with the smallest number first. So the great question this morning about small round blue cell tumors, if I choose a lineage-based, a keratin, a lymphoid marker or two, a melanoma marker or two, I'm only doing maybe a panel of 6 markers. So I'm keeping the costs down for our patients. And then once I know which direction I want to go, then I can go to my definitive stuff. Because once you start doing things like this, that incurs a cost. You've got to find a lab to do it, and it takes a little bit of time.
And
All right.
I had one more question. Shall
Yes.
I ask? Yes.
Go ahead.
Okay. Do you find any significance with the presence of mast cells in neurofibroma sections?
No, other than the fact that I was told that's one way to help prove it's a neurofibroma. I was just told, and I've seen, I look for them, because the DFSP probably is not going to have mast cells. I'm going to tell you that first case that we saw, when I did the biopsy, there were 1 or 2 mast cells in it. So we were convinced. So I think you can look for them. And I think mast cells are present in fatty tumors and they're present in nerve tumors. But I don't think there's any predictive value of it. I think it's just one of those things that's along for the ride. Now, I don't know why, and I've asked every head and neck pathologist, and they're like, I don't know. They're just there. So I think that's a nice clue. Just like if you see a lot of crush artifact, if it's a blue cell tumor, you see a lot of crush artifact, you see a lot of sort of carrier hexus, like nuclear dust, Yeah, it's pretty likely it's either going to be a neuroendocrine tumor or it's going to be a lymphoma. That's helpful. I hope that helped answer the question.